Well, good evening, Ehud Yaari from Jerusalem. Thank you for taking some time to touch on a couple of key issues that many of our members and many people in the United States and around the world obviously have an ongoing concern, but don't approach your expertise. So let's get right to it. If we had a map right now of Israel, the Palestinian territories, and Jordan, can you tell us what is this annexation debate about, and what parcels of land, what territory does it really include?
Yes, well, it's my pleasure, of course. The Trump vision for peace allocates to Israel, in the context of an agreement with the Palestinians, including the later establishment of a Palestinian state, about 30% of the West Bank territory, including the West Bank, the settlement blocks, and isolated settlements on the mountain range of Judea and Samaria. Bibi Netanyahu's idea is, since the Palestinians are not coming to the table anytime soon, and as his rival, now partner, General Benny Gantz said today in a briefing, the Palestinians are, forgive me, in deep S, and we cannot wait for them. So Bibi is saying, let's annex that part which is allocated under the Trump vision to Israel, change the reality underground, and as his ambassador to Washington, Ron Dermer, phrased it, instead of pursuing the two-state illusion, let's look for a two-state solution. So it's basically an idea that Israel moves ahead because it has accepted the Trump vision. The Palestinians are saying, no, we will take the first step and wait for them to come on board. And then there is all the details in the plan, which we can go into if you're interested. Now, Bibi has to get the approval of his rival partner, General Gantz, and his party, Blue and White, for the move. Although he does probably have a majority in parliament, in the Knesset, to go there without their consent. But in order to keep the coalition in place and keep the Gantz's hope that he is going to inherit him as prime minister in 18 months, he wants to move now. Gantz is saying, very important, the US government, there is at this point Jared Kushner and the president and Ambassador Friedman here in Israel are saying we would support a move which is agreed upon between Bibi and Gantz, not unilaterally by the Likud. Gantz is saying, I'm willing to go for annexation because, as I said, the Palestinians are where they are, but I will not support annexing any territory with a sizable Palestinian population. If there are any Palestinians in the areas to be annexed, they will be given equal rights, residency, etc. And Gantz says very vaguely, I would like to get international acceptance of the move, which doesn't seem very likely at the time. Bibi has presented Gantz with 5 different versions of an annexation map, starting with the 30% of the West Bank territory, including the Jordan Valley settlement blocks and the outlying settlements, ending with a...
Jordan, The Jordan Valley, meaning the area that abuts the border with Jordan?
It's a very relatively a wide area along the Jordan River, going all the way up to the slopes of the mountain range. We're not talking a kilometer or two. We're talking of something which is about 20% of West Bank territory, mostly, by the way, unpopulated by Palestinians, and the town of Jericho, which is the only real Palestinian city there, is going to be out of it. Is not going to be annexed. So Bibi has presented these 5 different maps, all the way between 30% annexation down to 12% annexation. He's waiting for Gantz to say what he's thinking about it, and he finds it, to the best of my own information, he finds it difficult to get a very clear answer from Mr. Gantz and his partner, the current foreign minister, ex-general, ex-chief of staff, Ashkenazi. This is where we are. There is an annexation move of between 12 and 30%, and Bibi also raised the possibility of doing it in a gradual manner. Let's say have a piece annexed now and another piece later on. This is where we stand now, and we don't have the answer yet.
And for the people who live in this percentage of land, Jews and Palestinians, well, on the ground, what are their views?
I would say, and I'm basing myself now on a new poll taken amongst the West Bank Palestinians and published just a few hours ago. The Palestinians, and there are few of them, there may be few thousands, no more, in the 30%. Palestinians would be happy to become Israeli citizens and enjoy all the benefits, social security, healthcare, etc., that comes with it. The settlers are split between those leaders or heads of the regional councils of the different settlements who are saying we shouldn't go there because this means that ultimately we may have a Palestinian state, and we don't want that to happen. And those heads of the settler councils were saying, wait a minute, we have experience, the Palestinians will never come on board, and therefore let's start making realities underground. Let's start drawing the map. And Bibi is seeing himself as, hopefully from his point of view, the guy who will be determining the eastern border of Israel, which even Ben-Gurion never did. So there is opposition amongst the settlers to the move, although many of them are going to be annexed to Israel. And Bibi, it seems to me, has decided to move ahead if he can, in spite of those reservations.
A quick question, because I understand much of that territory is still technically under military law. Is that correct? Does it become civilian law, the annexed territories, the day after? What's the change practically, not politically, but practically on the ground for the people who live in these areas?
Okay, one, all the territory is, at least nominally, under the jurisdiction of the IDF commander of the Central Command. That is, if you want to build a balcony in a settlement or anywhere else, you need the approval of the military commander of the Central Command. if annexation happens, that means you will apply, like everybody else in Israel, to the Interior Ministry. But the truth is that annexation will change nothing, in my humble opinion, in the lay of the land, underground. There won't be any real change. Bibi will be printing new maps of Israel, including the areas that are going to be annexed. But not much is going to be annexed. And it's already clear, I mentioned it before, that the few Palestinians who may be in the territories that are annexed will have the same rights as the Jews there, as the settlers.
Well, considering the expected blowback, especially from the EU and NGOs and the United Nations, and all lining up and wringing their hands and threatening possible sanctions, in your professional and personal opinion, is this worth it? Is annexation worth all of this headache? Or is it to be expected whenever Israel does something, they're going to get hit anyway?
I'll give you my own opinion for whatever it's worth. I think that the risks are too high. And the benefit of an annexation move is very limited, sort of. For me, it's hard to see what would be the benefit. Because my attitude is the following. We are managing well in this respect. We are basically in control of the security all over the West Bank. Nobody has stopped the different Israeli governments, whether Labor or Likud, from expanding settlements and establishing more, although it didn't happen in the past decade or so. We have good cooperation with the Palestinian Authority, in spite of all the tensions and the rhetorics, etc. And what was Bibi's doctrine, which I commend him for, always. And I'm one of the guys who has respect for him and for his political and diplomatic, innovative, creative thinking. I'm not one of those many Israelis who poo-poos him. Not at all. Bibi's doctrine was very simple. The Palestinians are not going to say yes to any offer, which, as you know, I've been saying since long before Oslo. So Bibi said, okay, let's take care of relations with the Palestinians, manage it without having a resolution of the conflict, as we were doing over the past decade when he was prime minister and before, and spend our energy on building bridges to the world, gaining new friends, and building bridges to the Arab world. Bibi was, almost in a spectacular manner, very successful in doing that. We won as friends countries like India, like other Asian powers. We have built relations, which are of course complicated, with China. Japan is an ally in many ways. We have 12 times more Japanese investments now in Israeli high-tech industries than we had 5 years ago. Brazil, Argentina, the Eastern and Central European countries, etc., etc. Greece and Cyprus joining in Israel, with Israel, in what I call the Jewish Hellenic alliance in the East Med vis-a-vis Turkey. Excellent relations being built with the Gulf states, Egypt, and other Arab players, to the point that the Saudis and the UAE are saying publicly now to the Palestinians, to Mr. Abbas, we are not going to give the Palestinians a veto power over our relations with Israel. We have interests in common, and we have an enemy in common, Iran. By moving towards annexation, you may jeopardize at least some of it. And I didn't go into all the African states and etc. But my main worry, and I can explain why, is not what would be the Palestinian reaction. Believe me, Aid, the Palestinian Authority, Mr. Abbas, doesn't have a clue what to do. I think I know what's going in their deliberations. Every night they sit for hours, the leadership of the PA. They don't know what to do. To dissolve the PA, not to dissolve a PA, to declare for the umpteenth time statehood or not, to relinquish providing services for the population. They are not sure what to do. And the Arabs, mainly the Gulfies and Egypt, are very, very careful in their reactions and warnings. What I'm worried about is the reaction in the US, mainly the Democrats and parts of the Jewish community, and on this you are much better expert than I am, and reaction in Europe. So I assume that most of Europe will not follow Belgium, Ireland, in calling for sanctions and whatever measures, suspending Israel's association agreement with the EU. But there will be a reaction, and it will be negative. And since, as you know, I'm a frequent visitor to Australia, I can tell you, we have their bipartisan support of Israel. I don't know how much of it can survive a move for annexation, because people will say, 1 minute, you've been telling us for years that everything is up for negotiations, including settlements. And you kept telling us that if it takes, you are removing settlements, as we did in Gaza, as we did before that in the Sinai Peninsula. We evacuated 2 cities in the Sinai Peninsula. By moving for annexation now, we are saying, well, we didn't really mean it, and there are too many people who will not like it.
Very clear analysis, and a lot of tough implications domestically in Israel and globally. So we'll see in the next few days what will evolve. Let's pivot to Iran, not so much about their nuclear program, although I wonder your views of how much the coronavirus has impacted that country, but specifically, what grade would you give to their efforts to create Lebanon, parts of the Golan Heights, Iraq, as frontline territory for them to be able to attack Israel? How successful have they been? What steps are Israelis taking to counter it? And are there red lines right now that could lead to war?
I don't think that we are there, but I think I have to make a general comment first in order to have a perspective. What we are witnessing is a meltdown, fragmentation, collapse, implosion. Anybody can choose his description of the Arab world. Lebanon, bankrupt, totally bankrupt. You don't want to be a Lebanese these days. Syria, totally bankrupt. Iraq and the Kurds, to a lesser extent, but very bad shape. In Iran, the currency is at rock bottom 200,000 reals for the dollar, which means in these countries, and I can go on and on, in these countries, the average citizen cannot survive on his current income or salary or whatever. So the scene is a scene of a meltdown of the Arab world, and what is no less important, the total fading away of the concept of political Arabism, the sense of Arabism, taken advantage by the two non-Arab powers in the region, Turkey, which is a different opera, and Iran, each of them, each in its own way, grabbing for chunks in the collapsing Arab world. Now, the Iranians have a big problem now, not just because of their domestic issues, which are very serious, but because Lebanon, that is Hezbollah, is facing a major crisis. And the US, you have a great ambassador now in Lebanon, Dorothy Shih, very good ambassador, and she has made clear to the Lebanese, there will be no IMF, International Monetary Fund, rescue package as long as Hezbollah is in charge. And Nasrallah, the Secretary General, the leader of Hezbollah, is saying, well, we will look to China. Very good idea. In Syria, you have the Caesar Act, passed by Congress and now in force. This is killing the Syrian economy, affecting the average Syrian citizens. We are seeing already that the Assad regime is losing control in many areas. When it comes to Iran, they have to help Hezbollah in Lebanon, sort of try to stabilize a process in impoverishment. In Syria, all of a sudden, they find themselves up against the Russians, because the Russians are asking themselves, well, what's the benefit of allowing the Iranians to have such influence over the Assad regime? There is no real fighting anymore. In the province of Idlib, which is contested, still held by the rebels, the Turkish intervention backed by the US has stopped the offensive. So why do we need the Iranians? So very close to our border, across from the Golan Heights in the Syrian Golan, what we see, the Russians building their own militias to compete with the Iranian-sponsored militias. And the constant Israeli air raids on Iranian targets in Syria did not stop their effort to build their own war machine on Syrian territory, but it's slowing it down, it's costing them a lot, it's not moving the way they had in mind. In Iraq, thanks to a really impressive team that the US government has in place. I'm speaking about Ambassador Jim Jeffrey, the special envoy, Ambassador David Satterfield in Ankara, and Ambassador Chuler in Baghdad. The US has managed to reverse Iranian control, influence, sway over the government in Baghdad, to the point that the Iranians have to accept, even applaud Mustafa Kadhimi, the ex-chief of intelligence, as the new prime minister of Iraq. It's the same guy that they have blamed for the elimination of General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force, by the US. In Iraq, they are definitely on a retreat. They are not out, but they are in a retreat. So I think that the main game now is about two issues. One, Iranian violations of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. And we have a new chief of the International Atomic Agency in Vienna, an Argentinian, who is saying, well, the Iranians don't let my people go there and go there and go there, etc. And now the EU is willing to play to some degree with the United States on this. That's one issue. And the second, which I think is more urgent, is by October this year, according to the Obama deal, so beautifully negotiated by Wendy Sherman and Burns and others, the Iranians are allowed to start modernizing their army, which is totally out of shape, totally outdated, by buying new, the best weapon system that they can find. And the Russians are willing, and even more so the Chinese are willing. So now the move is to try and extend the embargo. And I don't know to what extent it will work. But I think that at present, the Iranian drive to obtain some sort of a big brother position, Baradar Bozorg, they call it, in the Fertile Crescent, has been sort of checked.
Finally, Ehud, thank you for your amazing insights. If we can pivot to the, I guess what's called, depending on who you ask, the Persian Gulf, the Arab Gulf, the Gulf states that we all in our own ways are involved a little bit with the dance of normalization between the Jewish world, the Arab world, and of course the state of Israel. Could you give some reflection on what's going on there? What are their priorities? What's their state of their health, if you will, in terms of stability for the regimes over there that count?
I think the major players in the Gulf are in a real distress now. Not just because of the oil prices and the prognosis for their financial situation 5-10 years down the road, but because they are suffering sort of a defeat in Yemen after 5 years, employing all the equipment supplied by the US. They have failed in Yemen, and now they have failed in Libya because of the intervention of President Erdogan with Turkish drones and military advisors, etc. They would like to expand and deepen their relations with Israel. They don't want to be curtailed by the Palestinians. And they are saying so, as I mentioned before. But they have to take care of their own public opinion, the media, especially social media these days. And if Israel moves for annexation, I think UAE, which is leading in building bridges to Israel, Saudi Arabia, even Bahrain, little Bahrain, will have to slow it down. I'll say to you, Abe, something as an Israeli. I am very reluctant to see the enthusiasm that you have in Israel about this new sort of unofficial alliances with the Gulf states. Because I have grave doubts about the stability of Saudi Arabia, about where the UAE is going, certainly about Qatar. The others are less of a player. I think we in Israel have to be very careful. On the one hand, how far do we go with the Gulf states? And I think we have to decide what our limits are. And the second thing is we also have to decide how far we move ahead with this East Mediterranean alliance with the Greeks, the Cypriots, with the Egyptians as sort of silent partner, etc., because of Turkey's reaction. We want to concentrate on Iran. We don't want to scare the Turks, and they are scared, that we are collaborating in an effort to encircle them, which is, I believe, was the driving force behind their successful military intervention in Libya.
Well, Ehud, amazing insights as always. We hear clarity in analysis that's probably ahead of the curve, in which many other so-called experts will be copying your statements but never giving you attribution in the next weeks and months, which has been going on for decades. And we appreciate your integrity, your insight, and your friendship. And thank you for informing our membership at the Simon Wiesenthal Center and interested parties all over the world, including some social media friends that I've met in a previous lifetime, even from Kuwait, who speak so highly of you. So thank you for everything, and maybe next time we'll pick up on Turkey.
My pleasure, always, with the Wiesenthal Center.